Speakcies.
I think we've established I'm not really an outgoing person when it comes to food, but I have extended myself into a new area, homemade yogurt.
All right, welcome to Origin of Speakcies. My name is Scott. I'm here with my friend Steve. And Steve, homemade yogurt. This is the equivalent of you liking, I don't say liking possums, but being okay with possums.
Right. Well, we'll see. I've extended myself to the possibility of it. I'm not sure it's going to work out. So I was recently in a work situation where I heard a couple people discussing some food they were making at home. Actually is a callback to the time that someone had offered me kombucha at work.
Oh, okay.
And that's when I thought it was still Korean barbecue.
Right.
And then over here in this conversation, I realized it's the fermented tea
right.
that you get. If there's anything worse than fermented tea, it's homemade fermented tea as far as I'm concerned. It's like, oh, so it's your own fungus. It's not even,
right.
something from that. So a discussion came up about people making homemade yogurt. Which to me just sounds kind of crazy because, I eat a lot of yogurt. I eat anything with protein on it, I'll eat at this point.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem to be, I've purchased it myself. It doesn't seem to be breaking the bank. Like we're
right,
deferring,
that's right.
Honey, you're going to have to pick a lower level college because Daddy likes his yogurt.
That is the weird thing, just to jump in, where there are a lot of things like that people do. They're like, hey, save money by whatever.
Yeah.
And it's usually something where I'm like,
brew your own shampoo.
Yeah, something like that. But anyway, so
this conversation led to someone discussing food, and there was actually someone in my office that makes another food that might surprise you that I like. It's an Indian pastry called a samosa.
Okay, I've heard of that.
Which somebody at work makes them, and they're gold. I had the problem of pounding them at a party one time and then realizing I don't know what the gauge is. Like, how many of these can I have?
Oh, that reminds me of a story.
Yeah. And at the same moment I did that, I felt like my cartoon belly, I went over the full mark.
So did you go over the mark?
I came close. There was a brisk walk that was made to keep things moving.
But you thought about it as you were doing it.
Yeah, it came close.
So I don't think I've told this story on the podcast. Do you know where I'm going with this?
Not at all.
Okay. So you have had experience with this in the past because one time when I like to bring up old stories every once in a while about how you get sick because we talked about the getting the chocolate milk situation and the vomit comment and all that. I do recall going camping with you one time, and you know how you sit around the campfire. Well, I don't know. At least we do because this is like, we use the word camping as it's not real man camping. It's sitting around.
It's not glamping either, but
it's not glamping. I mean,
it's not rough.
But we're not roughing it. And there's always weird food there. And there were these, what do you call them? Cinnamon rolls. These kind of the cheap cinnamon rolls.
Oh, those were delicious.
And Steve polished off. You had to have had
a box.
Like a box of them.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to describe what these rolls are so you know, because they're really small and they're pretty good. They're just like these little rolls stuffed with whatever cinnamony stuff is in there.
Yeah. And covered in frosting. Now,
it may not have helped that you were chasing it with Woodford Reserve all night.
I think that helped because I think that made me
braver and smarter.
You. Yeah.
Because the next day, I mean, some guys were hungover, but you were not feeling well, and you just had two words, cinnamon rolls. And I'm like, Steve pounded that box of cinnamon rolls.
It had nothing to do with the half a pint of Woodford either.
So with that sort of experience, you know how sometimes you drink too much and you go, okay, I can't drink wild turkey anymore, or at least for a long time and never that much.
Or ever.
Exactly. So I'm glad that you didn't make yourself sick on that. But let's get to the yogurt now.
So the same individual that made the samosas, I found out also makes yogurt. And I decided, you know what, I'm trusting you in with your other creation.
Yes.
Person deserves my trust. I'll also give it a chance to be honest, to say something you got to know about me is I can't fake it if I don't like food. So the good thing, this was the samosas was the individuals like their go-to. It's like their big their weapon of mass destruction of food in a great way. It was that should be their go-to weapon.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try homemade. I haven't tried it yet.
Oh, you haven't tried it. Okay,
No,
you can report back.
Yeah, and it's going to have protein in it. And I told the person, I'm like, you know what, even if it's not good, just tell me, make up a protein number. Because how am I going to check?
Good point.
How do I know how much protein's in that yogurt that I'm having anyway? I was like, just, make up a number. Probably not. I've had like the 45-gram protein snack, so they can't fake it anymore. Like there probably is 45 grams of protein because it's undigestible. Right. But there's a chance this will be good. So we're seeing. I'm open to myself still.
So she's grandfathered in because of the samosas, which I like. That's a good tactic because otherwise, you know. Yeah. She hasn't done wrong by you.
And I also bartered as part of it that, what would help the yogurt go down would be to have some samosas with it. Ooh. So it's a win-win situation for me.
I tell you what, I will let you make me some homemade yogurt as long as you make me some of that other stuff too. Yeah. But people like to share. I have a woman at work that likes to share her food and every once in a while you do think about it. She'll bring you in some whatever it is she cooked and you go, I'm just eating something. I don't know the conditions in the kitchen. Oh, yeah. I don't know what's going on, which is, I know you think about that, but I mean, you took a pie, Officer Johnson's pie last season and turned out to be okay. Yeah. After a lot of worrying about it. Mm-hmm. So
it's good. I'm still open-minded as much as I can be. Yeah. As I've demonstrated, I think, with possums and, my open-mindedness on that. And I actually shared that with someone on my daughter's softball team who promptly told me they don't believe anything I tell them. Which reflected well on the young lady, and I told her to go ask her dad.
What was the situation where you were talking to someone on your daughter's softball team about possums?
Well, when I assistant coach again on my daughter's softball team, and I'm hanging out with a bunch of 10-year-old girls, so there's really not too much we have in common to talk about, right? And which I think reflects well on me.
It is, and it's also, I'll give that to you because you could be, and you're not trying to relate to them on their, like if you were like, so how about that, Justin Bieber or whatever?
Yeah. Have you guys listened to Young Gravy yet?
Right. You seem creepy, but if you give them a random animal fact, then it's like you kind of seem old, like an old man.
Well, I still seem creepy, but it's just in a different. It's more of an appropriate level of creepiness, I think.
Yeah. All right. So what are we doing tonight, Steve?
So tonight we are covering idioms that can be traced back to Samuel Taylor Coleridge.
Good job. That's a hard name to say for some reason.
It is. And I've been in my head I've been flipping his middle and last name a whole lot too.
Right. Because Taylor seems like a last name. Yeah. Samuel. Wait. Now, see, I was going to get it wrong. It's Samuel Coleridge Taylor.
Nope. Samuel Taylor
there
Coleridge.
You go. Yeah. Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Yeah. A name as an English major. I feel like, I remember the guy. Yeah. I can't remember anything about him, so I'm glad we're going to talk about him.
We'll help that, and you'll meet some other guys on our journey today that are names that you know. Yeah. And then they're names you spit out when you talk about poets, and then you don't know anything else about. So we'll talk a little bit about him, and also some really cool idioms that I find I use, and also have a lot of, still we see their effect in pop culture today. So Samuel Taylor Coleridge, major poet of the Romantic period. So little background on what Romanticism is. So I think it's best described in contrast to what it reacted against. So a lot of times in art, you'll see movements arrive in reaction to things that are established. So in contrast to rationalism and classicism of the Enlightenment, which was very much based on logic and reason and moving away from, I guess more divine, church-inspired sort of Renaissance things. Mm-hmm. So Romanticism came up kind of post-Enlightenment. It was big at the end of the 18th century and one of the 19th. And it was something that kind of looked at more medieval things, but also got back into sense and emotion, maybe some things that had been lost as order and reason became involved.
I want to comment on that. That's really interesting because that happens in art, and it's like something that happens in music too, that I've been thinking a lot about lately, which is there's the reaction to the reaction. So there's like when I just did that personal records about like emo, and then I've got one coming out about grunge, and they're both similar in the sense that they're bringing like emotion and earnestness and things back that weren't around, but it's always a throwback to something else, but just with new elements. And it sounds like that's kind of what this was too. And then you react to that going, we don't want this emotional romantic stuff. Let's get to the, the rational, etc.
Yeah. And something that helped me years ago kind of understand this better, actually helped me understand a lot more of modern art, is a book called The Shock of the New. Came out in the early 90s. The author was Robert Hughes, and it explained a lot of modern art as one movement would come, something else would react to it. And I've had that just kind of stereotypical reaction sometimes to see modern art and go, it's a cup on a pedestal in the middle of a room. I don't get it. It makes me angry, which still 9 out of 10 times that still works. But this helped me kind of understand a little bit more. So to understand the Romantics, I think it's important to understand that, this is post-Enlightenment, sense and emotion were coming back. Rationalism was being pushed aside a little bit of idealism still around from the French Revolution, an idealism that ignored all the people that got their heads cut off, but that's for another day. So some of the... You have to ignore the violent parts to be able to appreciate the utopias that come after a revolution. And I'm glad that you mentioned utopia. Samuel Taylor Coleridge actually had a utopia that he planned that we'll discuss here in a little bit. Okay, so cool. Get just a little bit more context of the era. Some people that are around that time, we mentioned poets that everyone's heard of, John Keats, Lord Byron, Percy Shelley. Some of the authors around that time, Mary Shelley, Alexander Dumas, Victor Hugo, and one of the stars of this season. Oh, Barry Popick? No. Close. Sir Walter Scott. Oh, man. Yeah. He's back. So he's back. So Samuel Taylor Coleridge was in that era. Some of his most famous works include The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Kubla Khan, and Christabel. He was also into opium. We have seen him in a previous episode on the definition of pipe dream. He popped up in Pipe Dreams, yes. Kubla Khan, his poem. Yes. Goes to that, and we'll actually talk about that some more here. Some things I didn't know about and I found surprising. He worked as a Unitarian preacher and often wrote on religion. Okay, so interesting. Yeah. So he was a preacher. He was into opium. Yeah. And this is back when the opiate for the masses was actual opium. Yeah. And I guess it was more, you could go to the opium houses and all that. It was more accepted. Yes and no. Yeah. I think, we in a weird contrast, a weird parallel to what we still see today, that it's still around in different ways. Was it more like marijuana is now, to where it's still somewhat taboo but more accepted? Well, I don't know. We don't have to deep dive into opium, but it's... Well, his life ended prematurely based on his opium addiction. He ended kind of in the story didn't end well for him. But we're going to focus on some good things. Thank God we've moved past that in society. Yeah. Good Lord. So we're going to concentrate on some good things that he's left for us, including some idioms. I'm going to start out with one that I will often use, albatross around my neck. Yeah. Or albatross around your neck. Yep. So is this one that you've heard of before or used? Yes, this is one that I had heard of, and I feel like maybe I've heard a story about it, but I don't remember. Never really understood it, but got the fact that it was something kind of holding you back. Maybe a little bit like having a monkey on your back, not totally, but in that same vein of something that's weighing on you. It's a burden, and that from Phrases UK, as they define it, as a burden some unfortunate person has to carry. So this goes back to Samuel Taylor Coleridge's poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, in which the mariner of the story shoots an albatross and then brings bad luck onto himself and his crewmates. That's right. And then is left with the albatross around his neck to pay, basically pay for his crime. Oh, okay. So I didn't know that. So he shoots the albatross, and then they literally make him wear it around his neck because they know it's bad luck. Okay. And it's one of those things that as soon as he does it, the sailors turn on. Yeah, you just don't shoot an albatross. Yeah. Got it. Which makes sense. And I would imagine we've talked several times about how just terrifying it would have to be a sailor in times past.
Oh my
to
gosh.
go out there with no radio, no black box, no nothing.
You're going into it like, I'm probably gonna die. Like there's a high percentage, but the risk reward could be really good here. Now I was just thinking about this. I mean, I don't know that I could pick an albatross out of a lineup. Like, is an albatross known as something else, I wonder, or is it just a bird that doesn't come up that often unless you're using this idiom?
Well, it's a large seabird, and in the poem, the albatross assists the ship and the crew as they're stuck in ice somewhere and gets them out. And then for some reason, the mariner literally picks it out with a crossbow.
Right, because he's like, thanks a lot, now we're going to eat you.
Yeah, which I don't think you eat albatross. I have never heard of that.
I think you're right. Now that as soon as I said that, I was like, I don't know that that's a... But I mean, when you're out on the open sea, like they say, any port in a storm, any bird in a pot, I would think.
But in this circumstance, it's the rightfully, I would say, superstitious crew does not agree with his decision. So that's where the use of albatross around my neck, around your neck, comes from. The crew turns on the mariner and makes him wear it as they all die, and he continues to live on as everyone else dies around him. Eventually, the albatross falls from his neck, and the dead bodies of the crew are possessed by good spirits and rise again and help him get out of his situation.
Oh. So it kind of has a happy ending then.
A little bit. As it ends, he's not sure if he's actually seen himself go home and if he's hallucinating or if it's actually happening. So the story ends happy in the sense that he doesn't die, but his curse, once he makes it back home, is to pretty much roam the earth, telling his story over and over.
And keep that idiom alive, too.
Yeah. But it does a good job. And it did, I mentioned how it affects pop culture. And one of my favorite tellings of the story is actually from the band Iron Maiden. So I'm not necessarily, I wouldn't call myself a huge Iron Maiden fan. I respect some of the stuff they've done. And they're kind of what I call them, it's like workout music. They'll show up every now and then.
Sure.
With that. But they actually have a version of The Rime of the Ancient Mariner on their 1984 album Power Slave. And I think the word epic gets thrown around. It's a pretty epic song. It's a good, if you want to kind of lose yourself for about 12 minutes in an 80s heavy metal song.
Yeah, I'm all about that. I'll check that out.
And sometimes you need to do that. So,
but they have the title Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and then they actually sort of talk about the story.
Yeah, well, they don't do like a word for word, which I think would also be interesting, but pretty much inspired. And there are some famous quotes from the story that they pull out of there, including, I think the most famous one, water, water everywhere, and all the boards did shrink. Water, water everywhere, not a drop to drink.
Oh, yeah.
As you know. And I remember learning this as a kid. Did you ever play Choose Your Own Adventure or read the Choose Your Own Adventure books? Yes,
absolutely.
And that's how I learned you're not supposed to drink salt water.
You chose to drink the salt water and died. Yeah.
So that actually worked out.
I did that once where I chose to eat a hot dog that looked bad in the I mean, you died a lot in those because it was like you wake up late for school, you didn't pack your lunch, there's an old hot dog. Should you eat it? And I'm like, thinking about myself at 8, I'm like, yeah, of course I'd eat it. I'm not throwing away a hot dog. And then I died.
Yeah. Considering how much time you and I spent at 7-Eleven as a kid, we've eaten those big bites.
I still remember something you said one time when we were working in the same area and there was that 7-Eleven there. There are 7-Elevens everywhere. So if you're listening to this somewhere outside of Virginia and a place where there aren't 7-Elevens, you get a sense of every story has a 7-Eleven. You made a comment because I don't think I've gotten another hot dog since then from there because you said something like, that's what separates man from beast. And I thought that was very true. And I was like, you're right. I can't eat this. My dog would eat it. But yeah, the water everywhere thing is something that I've heard forever. And it is something that I think about if I'm thirsty at the beach or something. Not that I would, but you just think about it. It also spawned a chain of mall bathing suit stores. There's one called Water Everywhere. So it's still relevant in these times.
Yeah. Opium and bathing suits.
Bathing suits.
Samuel Taylor Coleridge.
Can we call them like STC or something?
I did. That's what my notes say.
Oh,
and then
cool.
I started thinking about STP.
Then for a second I thought about TLC, which makes no sense. But
Yeah.
STP, TLC. Now I'm not going to be able to say that. I was thinking about SLC, Salt Lake City, but I'd be cool to call them STC. Oh,
STC.
XTC also. One of a band that you used to like, right?
No.
See, I have these memories of Steve as like the older brother I didn't have.
No, the reason,
and I could have swear that Chris used to give you crap about liking XTC. Am I remembering that incorrectly?
Close. There was a girl I was chasing that was
God.
really into it. So that was one of those obligatory.
Oh,
you
you're
had to
absolutely
tolerate.
right. That what you tolerated it.
Yeah.
And because he really didn't like her. I remember that.
Yeah.
And part of the reason, because he would always talk about how terrible XTC was. So that in my mind is still something that, just like STC is still relevant in this world.
Yeah.
XTC for me is only relevant in that I remember that story.
Yeah.
So
Well, good. So that was an albatross for me around my neck.
Yes.
I was having to deal with XTC for a long summer, but I was also able to have that removed from my neck. Now I wander the world, getting bitter when I hear XTC
right.
brought up. So albatross is as a metaphor. We discussed how Iron Maiden didn't really use it as a metaphor. They actually did the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. But you see the metaphor of the albatross in a lot of different things. Some examples of artists who have used it. Aaron Lewis of the band Stained.
You don't have to tell me where Aaron Lewis is
just
from.
in case someone else is not as classy. Listen to
Stained?
this.
Stained? Don't talk bad about Stained on this podcast.
I didn't.
Okay.
They like, you know what? Get that E out of the way. Stained. Flogging Molly. Fleetwood Mac has a song called Albatross. Judy Collins use it as a metaphor in her song Albatross.
Aptly named.
LRB, a.k.a. the Little River Band, references it in their song Cool Change.
Interesting. It's a little surprising because it's not like you can really rhyme a lot with albatross. Well, I guess you can, the last part.
Yeah.
Boss.
Hoss.
Yeah.
A stone that has moss.
Yeah, there you go.
I hope Young Gravy's listening, because maybe these are ideas that
this
he
is
could
gold.
use.
You can have it. You can have it, Young Gravy. Just come on the podcast, please.
Gold gravy. So the next one's a little bit on the other end of the cycle. We've just talked about a lot of death in Iron Maidening and wandering the earth as a hermit after being saved by undead.
A little on the dark side.
Undead sailors. Yeah, a little dark. So we're going to go to the other end of the circle of life. We're going to do the birds and the bees.
Oh, okay.
So this is a metaphor or idiom I guess I've heard a lot. It's one of those ones that I think everyone hears it and knows what it means, but it also falls in that category of stuff that it's like seeing a man about a horse. It's a little too obtuse for me. I think that reflects worse on me than other things, that it takes me a while to go, why are you saying a man about a horse? Because I don't want to say I'm going to have a bowel movement.
Right.
That's why I'm saying you moron. Which is an actual conversation I had one time.
That's right.
So the birds and bees is as Phrases UK describes it as a euphemistic avoidance technique, which I think is good because it's one of those ones that like nowadays, birds and bees is a little obtuse, a little kind of avoids what you're getting at. It's not hot dogs and donuts. It's not something a little more graphic or blunt.
Right.
Even though hot dogs and donuts could be,
a Stained album.
It could be a Stained album.
Actually, there was a Limp Bizkit album that was close to that. It was the chocolate starfish and the hot dog flavored water.
Yeah.
So that's not a small. I mean, that's just a small jump to.
And any intellectual credit we've received for bringing in Samuel Taylor Coleridge has just gone out the window with a Limp Bizkit and Stained with no E reference.
And I'm really showing some cards here, but you did start the season by bringing up Young Gravy.
I did.
So
it's a post Young Gravy world we're in.
That's right.
Hopefully Barack Obama will show up here later.
See, we balance it out. We balance it out.
We'll have some balance with it.
So okay, so where are we now? So birds and bees.
Birds and bees is a way to talk about sex.
It's funny because I want to say talk about the birds and the bees.
Yeah.
You say it.
Yeah, because you say it so much. So it's a way to talk about sex and reproduction without necessarily saying sex and reproduction.
Now, hold on. Before, not to keep jumping in here, and you're probably going to get to this, but there's somebody that we talked about during all that jazz.
And that will come up That is part of the discussion we'll have today.
Okay.
Yep.
So I get no credit for remembering that? I
No,
want
you
credit.
you get some credit there.
Is it Cole Porter?
Yeah.
Is that, oh my gosh, my short-term memory is so shot.
Good for you.
But he wrote that song. Okay.
Yeah, so that he's
you
going to
taught
come
me
up.
a lot. I've learned a lot from you on this podcast. Which so as you remember in the first season, I brought all the idioms to the table.
Yeah.
Ever since you started bringing it, it's fun because I get to just sit back and be, oh, that's so cool. Like I thought Cole Porter was like a jazz musician. But he wrote all these songs and things.
Yeah.
So if you go back and listen to that episode.
Now you're going to learn about the birds and bees from Creepy Uncle Steve.
Oh, wow.
So the first use of this comes back to STC's poem, Work Without Hope from 1825. Read a bit of it here. All nature seems at work. Slugs leave their lair. Bees are stirring. Birds are on the wing. In winter, slumbering in open air. So apparently that's where that came from. Very euphemistic. So it starts with that. Speaking of STC's poems, one of his more interesting ones is Kubla Khan.
Yeah.
And it is one that he wrote under the influence of opium. He took some opium and had a dream and actually wrote a lot of the poem from his dream that he had. And this is one that's famous and also got into pop culture in some other ways too. So one of the first pop culture references, I think it's the first time I put this together, was in Citizen Kane, where they talk about legendary Xanadu, where Kubla Khan decreed his stately pleasure dome.
Yes.
And they bring that up. That was Charles Foster Kane's private estate, was called Xanadu. Keeping with the pleasure dome, this is also another reference that you might not think, and I think is very fun to bring up during The Birds and the Bees. The 80s band Frankie Goes to Hollywood and their album Welcome to the Pleasure Dome.
I thought you were going with Welcome to the Terror Dome by Public Enemy, but this is
which I believe they ganked off of Frankie Goes to Hollywood.
Yes.
So Frankie Goes to Hollywood, I think it's fun talking about birds and bees with them. I think it would be a little bit more accurate to talk birds and birds or bees and bees, but let your mind go with that.
Very confusing.
So they were famous for their song "Relax," which is one of those songs that I remember hearing was dirty, and it took me to in the mid 30s to hear it.
Oh yeah,
and they go, "Oh, that's what they're talking about. That's gross."
Yeah,
and but a very catchy song and a very well done song. And I've actually listened to part of that album, mainly in the Welcome to the Pleasure Dome song. They were a band that I would say weren't very good musicians. Okay. So the album is mostly done by their producer, by the name of Trevor Horn.
Okay.
Who is one of these guys that he was actually in the Buggles that did the video Killed the Radio Star.
Oh, yeah.
But it's one of these guys that's produced a million records.
Okay.
And, you've, like him or not, there's songs that you've heard that he's been involved with.
He's like the P. Diddy of the 80s,
Except he actually could play instruments.
Yes.
And had talent.
P. Diddy has talent. He's
found a way to make a lot of money with absolutely no talent. And that's a talent.
Well, compared to DJ Khaled and some of the people that are out there now, not including Young Gravy, of course.
Yes, not him. So they reference it and quote the poem in their song. And it's actually
pretty heady stuff.
It's like a 12-minute song. Well, it's basically, I think it's a lot of Trevor Horn doing stuff in there. It's something that oddly holds up. It's very 80s, but at the same time, it actually holds up kind of well.
Sure.
Well done song, well done album. They didn't do too much afterwards, I think, especially once they started playing their own instruments. But
was there a guy named Frankie in that band?
No, I think it was a quote from involving Frank Sinatra.
Okay. Good to know.
Yeah.
See, this could be your personal record. I think you should think about that whenever we have you on as a guest.
I can make that easy for you. That will not be Welcome to the Pleasure Dome.
We're going to rule out Welcome to the Pleasure Dome.
Take it off the list.
That just leaves the rest of
just the rest of their
catalog.
Their catalog is wide open though still. So back to other pop culture references for STC involving birds and the bees. You'd mentioned earlier the Cole Porter song. Let's Fall in Love, which includes the line, birds do it, bees do it, let's fall in love. So Phrases UK actually thinks that this had a lot to do with this getting out there. And it's something I think it kind of holds up well because I think everyone seems to know what it is.
Well, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
And this is probably a dumb question, but maybe others have it as well. And since you've done the research, I always thought there was like a story about like birds and bees that parents used to tell their kids about, sex.
Yeah.
Is there an actual story? But I never got that as a story, or is it just a euphemism for getting the talk?
It's just a euphemism, according to what I've
seen. My whole life, I thought there was like some story about. Yeah. So there's a bird named, Jeff, and he meets a bird, and then wow. Okay. So that's probably, I might have to edit that out because that sounds really dumb.
I actually thought the same thing. And I'm glad, I'll go with you. I'm glad you vocalized that. I wouldn't have said that.
If there is an actual story and you know it, somebody please email us at steve@speakcies.com.
Let me jump in there. I do not want to hear any of your weird sex stories about animals or birds or insects or whatever bees are. What are bees?
Just go ahead and send it to him. Bees are insects, right? Okay. Yeah. Now, this is... That part's definitely...
Let's talk more about Frankie Goes to Hollywood.
Yeah. A new podcast from Speakcies.
True Facts with Robert Banquet.
True Facts with Robert Banquet.
True Facts with Robert Banquet.
History.
True Facts with Robert Banquet.
Science.
True Facts with Robert Banquet.
Literature.
True Facts with Robert Banquet.
A new podcast from Speakcies.
True Facts with Robert Banquet.
True Facts with Robert Banquet.
History.
True Facts with Robert Banquet.
Science.
True Facts with Robert Banquet.
Literature.
True Facts with Robert Banquet.
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 To learn more, go to speaksies.com/truefacts. That's speaksies.com/truefacts.
So my final idiom from STC, I'm getting more comfortable with that now. I like that. I think that should stick. Is something I don't really use in statements, but I kind of use philosophically when creating stuff, and it's suspension of disbelief. Mm-hmm. So again, relying on Phrases UK, their definition is temporary acceptance as believable of events or characters would be ordinarily seen as incredible. Mm-hmm. And it's something we do all the time. I'm a big Star Wars fan. I have to accept that there are space wizards who can use the Force and do things. And once you accept that, it's a great movie. And it's seen by all the movies that have been spawned. Right, and just a quick plug, I'm super excited about the new television show, The Mandalorian. They'll be coming on Disney+. Mm-hmm. That hopefully our Disney overlords will hear us. And I don't know, it's pretty cheap also. So maybe they'll extend something new. But it's going to be like, I think, $8 or something like that.
Is that the one that has Werner Herzog as the bad guy?
As a villain. And it also has Carl Weathers in it too.
Saw that. That's awesome. The preview, the trailer. So I'm not as big of a Star Wars guy as you are. But that trailer looks fantastic. And it's like, oh, they're gonna make a show like this in the Star Wars universe. Yeah. That's pretty cool.
And related to trailers and Carl Weathers, one of my favorite movie trailers I've been watching over and over again and definitely requires suspension of disbelief is Action Jackson.
Oh, yeah.
When's the last time you watched the trailer for Action Jackson?
I'm going to say 1989.
Okay. Before I leave tonight, we will watch it. And it is worth every second. It includes a young Sharon Stone.
Oh, I'm in.
A young, not yet dead Vanity. And Craig T. Nelson, Mr. Incredible himself, doing karate.
Craig T. Nelson doing karate. Okay.
Karate.
Karate.
When he does it.
Right.
It's karate.
Okay.
Suspension of disbelief.
Wait. Right. So if you don't have suspension of disbelief, you're going to be that guy watching Star Wars going, first of all, there's no way that they'd be able to get that ship off the ground. It's like,
they couldn't get from one planet to another planet. They would be 90 years old.
Also, those aren't humans, and those don't even exist. Yeah. Right. So
maybe they identify as humans. Have you thought of that?
Oh, yeah. But you don't want to be that guy. You have to suspend your disbelief.
Yeah. So this actually comes from STC's, what I'd call his magnum opus is Biographia Literaria. 2 volumes of 23 chapters. It's an autobiography with a lot of things going on in there. It's a preface to some of his poetry. It's got some philosophical work in there. It's got some chapters dealing with the nature of poetry and the question of diction, which was raised by one of his comrades, William Wordsworth, another Romantic era poet. So suspension of disbelief comes from that, and he uses, the quote is, "In this idea originated the plan of lyrical ballads, in which it was agreed that my endeavors should be directed to persons and characters supernatural, ... For these shadows of imagination, the willing suspension of disbelief for the moment, which constitutes poetic faith." And this is something that he also put into his work, as a lot of his work, and again, getting back to his use of opium, came in one of probably his third most famous writing, a poem called Christabel, which was never finished. He only had 2 parts of it completed. And it revolved around a story of a woman named Christabel who comes encounter with a stranger named Geraldine, who there's something just different about Geraldine. She claims to have been abducted by a group of men on horseback, but she does things like she can't cross water. Dogs bark when she's around.
Cool.
They see other things. According to Wikipedia, Geraldine and Christabel spend the night together, and when Geraldine undresses, there's some sort of terrible mark on her. But again, it's never finished. We're not sure exactly.
Do you have a date on that? Or I guess it's something he was working on when he died.
It was 1797.
Really?
Was the first part.
That's
and
interesting.
then 1800. And then he passed away in 1834.
That's some trippy stuff. And I mean, I guess that era, that's the same era that produced like Frankenstein and things like that.
And those were his contemporaries also.
So I feel like this whole era, and he's like, do you ever watch the movie Half Baked with Dave Chappelle?
Yeah.
And there's a scene near the beginning where Jon Stewart's like, "Hey, have you ever seen a $10 bill on weed?"
Yeah.
And then he's like, "You ever seen this movie on weed?" I feel like they're like the Jon Stewart from that movie. They're like, "Have you ever seen poetry on opium?"
And I think that is a very good point about STC, because he also had some ideas that I would necessarily not say he did it through the gaze of opium, but I think it affected him, was that he tried to start a utopia with some other poets.
Wait, so he was writing a book called Utopia, or he
No,
literally
was
tried
going,
to start a
He
utopia?
was going to start a egalitarian community.
Oh, okay, hold on. So don't you have like friends from college that have tried to do this too?
Yeah, but that idea was inspired by things that they did on weed. And I think that
Gotcha.
factors a lot more into it. This was maybe even a worse idea, because I'm thinking I'm starting a new society. The last group of people, you know what I need? I need a bunch of poets. That's what I need to help. If we're going to make this work,
Okay,
I need some poets.
Let's break up the duties here.
Yeah.
We need somebody to go get the water that's 2 miles away and fetch it and bring it back. Any takers?
Yeah. You in the silk blouse.
Yeah.
You cut that tree down for me.
I was writing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he worked on a utopian society. It was going to be called a pantisocracy.
Oh, gosh.
So, which again just doesn't, anything that starts out with panty is probably, it could be good, but not if, again, you're building it kind of with you and your poet friends. They were targeting to do this. He and some other poets, including Robert Southey, which I looked up a picture of him earlier. And again, whatever you think a poet that from the Romantic era, that's exactly what he looks like. He is the last guy I'd want to see with an axe trying to take a tree down.
They named a part of Boston after this guy, right?
It could be. I think Marky Mark's a big fan.
Yeah.
And that's where part of his life in the arts came from.
Well, these guys kind of remind me in a weird way of like the beat poets. You know what I mean? Like they're trying to create their own little thing, but like really, I mean,
I think more silk blouse than a beatnik beret and goatee.
Way precedes it, but it's that same thing of like, hey, we're artists and we're going to do this, take some drugs and create our own little area.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a bad comparison, but it just popped to mind.
So we see suspension and disbelief in his work when he brought in the supernatural. I could say also we see some suspension of disbelief when he thought he could build a utopian society, starting out with a bunch of other poets. So they actually looked at some areas to do this. They were going to. They looked in Kentucky. They looked in Pennsylvania. The final place they were looking was actually going to Wales, which maybe it's why my friend doesn't like the Welsh. Maybe he's very anti-utopian. Never happened, and Coolidge. It was something that actually kind of affected him and it not being able to happen. And it was mentioned a couple of his works, including a sonnet on the prospect of establishing a pantisocracy And another poem, which is actually true, that is one of his religious poems, not a joke, To a Young Ass. And that is the truth. So suspension of disbelief is one that I think is
he wrote that to the guy that like was the first guy to stand up against the panty-socracy.
Yeah.
First of all, panty-socracy.
Well,
Are you kidding me?
He was a Unitarian. So Samuel Taylor Coleridge, herein known as STC, not to be confused with STP or XTC, led a very interesting life, had some idioms and phrases that we still use. I like the idea, I think, of using, an albatross around someone's neck.
Yeah.
I like the idea of birds and bees as a way to get around saying, we're going to discuss sex. Suspension of disbelief is something that's a very important concept that I think is best used in literature, probably not used very well if you're starting a utopian society.
It was definitely something that could have been used for me in high school when it came to birds and bees.
Yeah.
But
and I think it was suspension of disbelief that I was going to have any, I was going to use what I learned about the birds and bees in high school.
That's where I was trying to go with that. But I got to say, I got to ask you though, what's your take? Because we do a lot of these guys that after we read about them, we go, boom, they're in our pantheon. We got Pepys, we got Fieri, we've got many of those guys, right? Sir Walter Scott, who's not Sir Walter Raleigh, but this guy, I'm kind of like, he spawned some good idioms and phrases, but
if this helps, I had a hard time putting this together because he did so much stuff that I almost had a hard time picking and choosing what to do. He was somebody that I came away from very impressed with his intellect, especially if he was relying on, a very debilitating drug in opium. That he, the whole thing about him actually working as a preacher, his father was an Anglican vicar. And there's a whole lot of theological work and political thought that he had that we didn't have time to get into.
So this, I'm just kind of seeing this one-dimensional thing because again, I know the name, I've heard of the works, but I don't know much about the guy. And just from what I hear tonight, I'm kind of like, but he had a lot more going.
I mean, we're kind of focusing on some stuff that might make him look a little flaky, but I would say he's someone I don't think he's going to end up in the Guy Fieri, William Shakespeare, Barry Popick pantheon,
but he could come back. We might see him again.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if it's good enough for Frankie Goes to Hollywood, I think it should be good enough for all of us.
I agree. Hey, this is Scott. Thanks so much for listening to the show. We really appreciate you. Tell a friend about the show if you think they would like it. And if you could, take a minute and give us a rating on iTunes or wherever you're listening, Apple Podcasts. I don't think you can give reviews on Spotify, but you can follow us there, which maybe you already do. I always wonder about that, asking people to subscribe after they've just listened, because I assume you're already subscribed. If for some reason you came upon this show not subscribed, now just go ahead and subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. Also, this week, True Facts with Robert Banquet is debuting. I am excited. This is the latest podcast from Speakcies with Robert Banquet from Montgomery, Alabama. You're going to love this show. I've heard the first one already, and it is really good. So thank you so much for listening.
Spilling over, getting the boys to go outside, getting the boys to mount to outside. Interrupt the strife, a conscious onlook of one's fate.
Now you're going to learn about the birds and bees from Creepy Uncle Steve.